What's up, everybody? We are back. John Delarose here, the leading Hispanic voice in science fiction. People seem to really enjoy my review of the Ditko Collection Volume 1 by Fantagraphics, which is a dive into his 70s objectivist work after he left Marvel. Mostly stories of Mr. A and some art of pinups of Mr. A and things like that were put into different magazines at the time. And now that went from 1968 to 1973. This volume goes from 1973 to 1976, edited by Robin Snyder, who's been working with Ditko, since this time, forever. And this gets into some different stuff. So we have The Avenging World, which there is a comic, The Avenging World, and actually then a larger trade paperback, The Avenging World, which collects this and other similar deals. But these are almost like pictorial essays on Ditko's philosophy, which we'll get into in a second. We also had some a essay called The Collector about who owns original art. Inside Comics H series, we have Comic Crusader, The Case for Silent Voice, Premise to Consequence, The Void, Captive Spark, and Masquerade. I don't know what stories those were originally published in, but we'll get to those shortly. And then we get back into some Mr. A material after that. So this is a big hodgepodge of different stuff right here, which we're going to see. It's a bunch of essay type of deals at first. Then it gets into some different one-off conceptual heroes that Ditko was making, and it gets back into Mr. A for the last third. So a very nice collection. Actually, I find this to be a better collection if you just want to get a sampling of kind of who Ditko is philosophically as his own comic artist. This might be better than the first one in a lot of ways. But it's also a lot slower of a read and a little bit harder of a read because he really goes into essay form with a lot of this stuff. And so if you're not interested in that, you and are expecting, a Captain Atom superhero comic, you are not going to enjoy this. So it just depends on your mood for what you're into. But this is it. All right. So Robin Snyder calls the last chapter Mr. A's final blow, Death versus Love Song, a crashing finale for the most original character in comics. It's very interesting. So I don't believe that's not the last Mr. A story. There's tons more, but so I'm not sure what was meant by that, but it's definitely the last one in the volume. So there we go. Good introduction, of course. This really summarizes the work very well. Then we get into the Avenging World, and the concept of the Avenging World here is the world's real. It's angry because mankind is just so stupid about things, and it's also injured because of the way that man acts irrationally in so many different regards. And so we see all these headlines of just horrible things happening, and the moral of the story is these horrible headlines happen because people act wrongly or irrationally, and that's what these next essays go into. So we talk about the mystic, and he shows sort of a combination of a Catholic priest with like astrology, divination, and all that. And I don't agree with all of this stuff, of course. But, I appreciate that he presents it here and lays out his arguments for it rationally. And different tools that are used: humility, sacrifice, mercy, guilt, etc. And those are listed as evils. I mean, I don't know. We could go into a philosophical video at another time, maybe, if I feel like it. But is what it is. And then all the people, of course, just paying attention to that. The skeptic intellectual, of course. These are your actually people. This is everybody thinks they're this on the internet at this point, where it's like if they see somebody of a wrong tribe say something, they go, well, actually, and then or did you think of, and then they come up with some hypothetical that doesn't exist. This is the skeptical intellectual, where they always have to be questioning things because they have no moral truth. I'm actually fighting with people on Twitter right now, which is just driving me crazy. But somebody was telling me that truth doesn't matter at the end of the day because there's much worse lies and deceptions out there, so why are you focusing on this lie and deception? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Oh well, whatever. And I also deal with a lot of these, the middle of the roaders, the people who don't want to stand up for good things because it's really hard to deal with. And then of course the people, then they stay over here and go, oh yeah, well, I just don't want to be an extremist, the horseshoe theory people, which I agree with. I don't put faith in the bad column because that's of course not my philosophy, but whatever. Then we have the Enlightened Person. Of course, this is probably big within the late 60s, early 70s when Ditko was actually writing this, because you had that whole like hippie movement, and where a lot of people went into the what's that transcendental meditation, and they paid some mystic, they paid thousands of dollars to go in and go Om or whatever the chant's supposed to be in order to quote attain enlightenment and peace and all that. And obviously, if you have to pay for it, it's an interesting way to obtain enlightenment, but it is what it is. And of course, back to more kind of objectivism, the humanitarian, by which I believe he is talking about more of people who virtue signal humanitarianism, and they're taken to its extreme. Having people rely on handouts obviously is a bad thing, and that is what it is. All right. We have the pragmatic businessman, which then he starts to actually go into sort of a comic about this. These are mostly just essays with some visuals that go very well with the essays, and of course he spells out different things with different deals there. Of course, the pragmatic businessman loves to start his business, but when there's too much competition, he wants to shut down the competition and loves to try to use the government to do so, and Ditko describes that as evil also. The Neutralist. This is one of my favorite drawings in the whole book, and you actually see this guy a few times. But notice I won't stand up or be against either side. According to the scales, I don't see any difference between the two extremes. It's not up to me to judge which side's right or wrong. You can fight amongst yourselves. I'm neutral. It doesn't affect me. So, very sad. Of course, I love this. So he's got, he's short and in stature. He looks ridiculous, and he's got no chin. And no chin, of course, is a nice symbolism of a lack of any conviction or sturdiness. So very well drawn, and it goes along with this. You got the world in the background also. And then he gives examples of what's going on, like, if you refuse to fight what's right, people get hurt. It's true. Just more examples again. So there's a lot of pages of this, and of course a lot of pages of the Neutralist and showing the deals here, and then it does go into a little bit of comic form finally. But there's a ton of words, and so these are kind of essays just written into the dialogue in a lot of the ways. So it's very long to read through these, which is fine. But just be aware of that if you end up going through this stuff. All right. So it's tough to go through this without going through all of it, because every page, Ditko really does short work very well, and so every page really has its statement to it, and this is what makes him a master comic artist. And so I can't just, like, when I'm reading through a lot of other comics that are general comics, I skip through a bunch of it and kind of just give you the feel of what's going on, because of course, this copyrighted stuff, and I want the due to be given here and all that. This is an out-of-print book and nearly impossible to find. Some of this material, I believe, is in the Avenging World graphic novel, which is also out of print and very hard to find. There's a smaller, Robin Snyder has published a smaller Avenging something. I'll have to look it up and maybe put it in the notes, which you can get some of this material also, though. So there you go. We get more into the world deal. We show what mankind could be with this like very epic visual of science and technology and progress, right? And by progress, he doesn't mean like social justice progress. He's very adamant about that. He means real progress, like extending our lifespans, making our lives better, things like things that are tangible. The tangibles. All right. And here's what I mean by like the big essays. So you get long essays through all this stuff, and this is. Everyone ought to do what is good, which is obviously true. Everyone must do what good, and this is showing the difference between I'm laying out a rational argument for something, and I'm going to force something, right? So, and he's very, very clear that force is bad throughout this entire thing. And this goes into a series of dialogues about this, which are very simple illustrations with lots of stuff there. Then we finally get into another comic again. All right, beautiful stuff. I love this. I love that Ditko's art is just like so stalwart the entire time. And what is amazing about these pages is so many of them have like 16 full panels like this. And these are fully drawn panels. That is really hard to do. It's very time consuming. The more panels and more figures that are drawn, obviously, the more time it takes to do. So he really put his all in all into this by doing 16 panels. I don't know an artist I could hire today who would entertain drawing 16 panels a page for me. So this is, and you'll see this throughout the book. There's just tons of these like layouts with lots and lots of panels to go through the story for you. So he packs a ton of story into every page, which is great because he then gives, he can make the story shorter, but also pack the same punch. So this is Agents of Liberty, comes up next, and now we're starting to get into some of the comics. There will be a couple more essays, but there will be different characters that he shows here. This is a pretty neat concept where Agents of Liberty are rescuing people from tyrants, and it's pretty fun. You see Ditko's, he always designs his characters very differently, so this is a very, very interesting character meant for a black and white like this, and you can see kind of his design in this, but all of his characters are designed so uniquely, and that's what I love about him. You don't really see the same things repeated when he designs characters, and we'll get into that further. Here's the original art essay, as I mentioned at the beginning of the review here. We get a comic about like caveman trying to figure out what work is, and showing how man evolved into, I can trade my meat for your berries, and that's good, and all that. And then it gets into to modern day and people reverting to savages and things like that. And here's a nice one-page pinup of his different heroes, which he's going to go into shortly. These are all single heroes. I don't know if they've ever been repeated. We'll find out as I read more Ditko stuff. But Cage is a quick hero that comes up, and he's fighting this guy who is like, he's got a ventriloquist that says words that like have power, and words have power, right? And it hurts people. And of course there's a villain who's like doing wrong things intentionally to try to harm people, and Cage solves that. Every one of these stories is very, very black and white, and not just in the way that the drawings are black and white, but in that, you know, the villain is definitely, you'll know who the villain is, you'll know what the hero is going to do every single time. That's not the point. The point is the process of logic of how the hero determined what was evil, and how people were quizzlings about it, or how people reacted toward that. So very interesting stuff through this. I love a lot of these drawings. Very nice art. And this is with the Void here. I think this might have been my favorite of this batch. So there's a gal, and she's working for her father or whatnot, and the Void finds out that her father's engaged in criminal activity, and he, of course, is dating her under his secret identity. So when he finds out about it, you know, I like the romance things, I'm not gonna lie. I think it's a beautiful thing. I love when I see it. But when he finds out that the dad is a criminal, they actually go through together, and even though she gets upset at first, she's a smart, rational being also, and a hero also, and so she's going to tell the truth no matter what the cost, she says, which I loved. I would just like cheered at that moment. I'm like, good. And then she went out and slapped her father. So, and of course, he goes to jail and all that. So that's great. I loved the Void. Now, the Void was a very interesting concept where it seemed like it seems like he has supernatural powers, but he makes it clear multiple times during that story that he doesn't have supernatural powers. So interesting there. And then my second favorite one out of this whole deal is the Masquerade. And again, it just has the romance element, and that just gets me every single time. If you guys read my books, you're aware of that. already. But this one has two characters who are looking into something. They're both told not to look into it because it's too dangerous for them. And so they're both going to come up with their own mask and their own thing. They're very much the same, but different. And she investigates separately. He investigates separately. And it's so cute throughout this. I love this concept. So they both kind of have the same thoughts as they deal with this. I'll handle this. I'll wrap this up. They both say the same things. And they always their gimmick is they want the last laugh. So that is their motif throughout all of this. Super cute, and they both sit there and they realize I really like this person because they understand that the other person is a good person doing the right thing. Also, I would love to see more of this. I would love to see more of the Void out of this whole group. But yeah, there were like 5 comics in here, as you saw, and then we get into the Mr. A section of things once again. So that was fun. Yeah, I mean, that first section of this book is a heavy, heavy read and takes a long time to get through. It is not a light reading situation whatsoever. So just be aware of that, and then be aware that the middle is very experimental. He's just trying different things. And so some of it works better than other things, and that is just how art works. So I'm glad that he does that, because if, you know, nothing drives me crazier than watching a so-called artist just get repetitive over and over again, right? If you're not expanding and doing different things with your art, you're really not, you know, producing art in a lot of ways. That's my opinion. All right. So Mr. A fights this guy Count Rogue, and Count Rogue is, quote, Robin Hood in a lot of ways, but he's just going to rich parties and stealing from them. And all the people at the rich parties are so stupid that they're like, wow, what an amazing guy. He's so dashing and charming, and he's stealing from only the rich to help for social justice. And he actually uses the term social justice. This is back in 1970. What is this? 75? Yeah, I didn't realize that term was used back that far. Pretty crazy. But he's mocking it for good purpose. And we're back to these 16 panels again through this grid. So these stories take a while to get through, but this Mr. A story is excellent. I very much enjoyed this, and to watch as he, as a reporter, you know, talks about this guy being evil, and everybody going, "You shouldn't be talking about that," and they keep talking about wanting to shut him down, but they never shut down his speech for real. And eventually, he exposes the guy as a criminal. And this is a 16-page story, so it's pretty, with all these dense panels and the dense dialogue, it feels pretty long. And you get through it, and of course, he saves the day as Mr. A. Good stuff. Yeah, this is probably the best Mr. A story, maybe the best story in the whole volume here. Very enjoyable. And then this one gets a lot more philosophical in the next Mr. A here. You see he's got the world concept again showing up, and good man, rational man, life, and then bad, unrational man, death. This is one of his motifs he goes through a lot. And free society, of course, isn't good. Slave society, and then the UN, this globalist, angry, you know, we must be a collective, creeps into the rest of society. So he's definitely making a big political statement right here. And it starts out with a crazy guy ranting, and then people going, you know, we should listen to everybody, right? As it is. And then Mr. A starts being framed for crimes, because they actually realize, you know what, if we dress up like Mr. A and send somebody out, the criminals do, we can tarnish his reputation and stop him. And so that is the sort of counterfeit argument that's being made by the bad guys here, and sort of the message of what people do to try to tarnish reputations when they don't actually have real arguments or real rationality for things. And it gets a little repetitive in this story. I feel like there's a lot of these crowd scenes right here. Of course, this is a very, very Ditko panel with the heads and then the talking like that. But they go into this a few times, and it's like, I think he goes into it 3 or 4 times with the whole, like, you know, showing people being just a stupid part of the crowd. And, you know, really only needed to be done once. I got the point at that point. And it slowed down the pace a little bit. So that's why I didn't enjoy this as much as the last story. But look at this one, 12 panel page. These are, I mean, no artists do things like this. This is pretty amazing. And of course, the calling card. I love seeing the calling card of Mr. A. And at the end of it, Mr. A leaves the villain dangling and falling to his death. And everybody's like, oh, that's so mean. but Mr. A does not show mercy to evil. So there you go. And then we get into the next story. So this is the last story in here, which is it's about polluting minds and all that. And this is a very direct costumed villain story versus a lot of the others. And this one has no dialogue to it. So it's very, very different than everything else in the book. And you're really focused on the art in this one. I love the villain design of this lady right here. Very cool and very different again. Kind of looks scorpion-esque, like the scorpion maybe? I don't know. A little different. Very cool. And we get a symbol who represents death. And he's just chasing down this woman, and he really hates this singer. And so all these women that remind him of the singer, he starts killing. And Mr. A goes into action because, you know, he's not going to let innocent women get hurt. Of course not. He's Mr. A. And so he ends up just falling in on this robbery, which we end up finding out is controlled by this lady right here. And he looks like he's going to get killed. Oh my gosh. And of course, that doesn't happen. Now, the villain here, see, he's a death symbol. He's got the skull. He's got darkness. We're in a graveyard, so he really lays heavily on the symbology here, which makes sense because there's no dialogue in here. So death and evil are synonymous. Life and good are synonymous, and that's where we go with this. And we have Mr. A then fight off this evil woman, finally, and then he puts 2 and 2 together of what's going on with this guy's murders, and then the singer here, and eventually rains on his parade. Now this has gotten even more brutal than the last one. So instead of just falling off a building or whatnot, Mr. A traps this guy in a place that's catching fire, and the guy burns to death after all his bad deeds. The end. So very fun. And, you know, I kind of like that. It always, like, it bothers me in comics a lot. You see, and they address this now. It's like they're almost metatextual about it in comics, modern-wise. But they you know, Spider-Man fights the Green Goblin for the 15,000th time. No, I will not kill him. And it's like, okay, well, you're just going to fight him again. And I will not let him die. I will save him because it's my job to save. And Mr. A takes a very different approach, which is just, you know what, this guy's evil. I'm not going to expend my effort on him. And that makes more sense. I don't know. It's an interesting thing, but as comic continuity goes along and these characters fight the same characters over and over and over again, it really loses any meaning to it, and all the battles really lose meaning to them also. And I think Ditko kind of addresses that and handles that in the way that he shows this in these comics. Very interesting. All right, I think it's enjoyable. If you are looking for like a real in-depth dive of Ditko's philosophy and like how it impacts his comics, this volume is actually a little better than the first one in that regard. You really get all the essays, you get a lot of experimentation, you get the Mr. A stories. The last the volume 1 is it's a little more linear, I guess, in the way that it presents. So I would recommend this one first over that from the philosophical standpoint. I think if you want more fun comic standpoint with this sort of objectivist leaning, then Volume 1 is a little better in that regard. So there's give and take, and this is his vision, and he executed it the way he wanted to. So that's all an artist can do. I enjoyed it. I thought this was worth the read, even though it was very, you know, obviously it's been a few days since I've reviewed a comic, so it's a very slow read, but a good read nonetheless. So 9 out of 10 in my book. Enjoyable. I can't wait to read more and get back to you guys. Let me know what you think of all this, and I will be back. Hit that like and subscribe button too. See you guys.